So in this video, I'm going to compare three consoles that were released over the course of the last 20 years. So that's one console at the start of each decade. PS2 from 2000, the Xbox 360S from 2010, and the Xbox Series X from 2020. Now I'm sure we all know which one is the best one out of these three. It's pretty obvious. But putting that aside, let's just have a look and see how different these consoles actually are. The first version of the PlayStation 2 was released in Japan on March the 4th in 2000, and it was released in Australia on November 30th, 2000, at a price of $749. Yeah, that's very expensive now, but that's what it was at the time. It went on to become the best-selling console in history with over 150 million PlayStation 2s sold. This is despite the fact that it had little support for online multiplayer, so you couldn't get something like Xbox Live on a PS2. And the console itself was actually weaker than its biggest competitor, the Xbox. Sony had established PlayStation as a worthy competitor to the likes of Nintendo and Sega, which by the way was discontinued pretty much because of the PS2 and its massive success. And the PS2 also doubled as a cheap DVD player, since most DVD players at the time cost like $1,000. While the first model of the Xbox 360 came out on November 22nd, 2005, the Xbox 360S was a revised version of the Xbox 360 that released later on June 18th, 2010. And it came out on July 1st in Australia. And at this point in this console generation, the Xbox 360 was crushing the PlayStation 3 in terms of sales and popularity, since they had a 1-year head start and the PS3 was $100 more expensive than the 360. All versions of the Xbox 360 combined would end up selling about 83 million units, which was roughly the same as the PlayStation 3. The Xbox 360S sold for about $450 when it first came out. The Xbox Series X was launched worldwide on November 10th, 2020, and on paper it's the world's most powerful console, which makes it better than its main competitor, the PlayStation 5, but in practice, games on these consoles either perform the same or they perform slightly better on the PS5. But both consoles haven't reached their full potential yet, so we don't really know for sure which one is more powerful. The Xbox Series X costs about $750 in stores. But since there's high demand for this console, it is out of stock nearly everywhere. Alright, now we know what these consoles are, let's compare all the different components of these consoles. And since there's a lot of information on these tables, I won't go into every little detail. I'll just explain the more interesting parts and I'll simplify it a little bit. The PlayStation 2 runs on the MIPS Emotion engine, which clocks in at about 300 MHz, while the Xbox 360 Slim and the Xbox Series X have processors which are more than 10 times more powerful than the PlayStation 2's. Okay, now this stuff about RD RAM and GDDR3 RAM, it all looks a bit complicated, so I'll simplify it a little bit. RAM stands for Random Access Memory, which is basically the amount of short-term storage that the console can hold for small tasks. And you could say the amount of megahertz is a measurement for how fast that memory is running. So that means the PS2 is running a small amount of very weak RAM, the Xbox 360S is running a larger amount of slightly less weak RAM, and the Xbox Series X is running a large amount of very fast and very powerful RAM. In terms of storage, the PS2 can only hold up to 40 GB of internal storage, while the Xbox 360 can hold up to 250 GB of internal storage, and the Series X can hold up to 1 TB of internal storage, which is on an SSD, which means things on that storage will load much faster. If you look closely, the PS2 actually has double the frame rate of the Xbox 360S. This is because developers during the time of the 360 sacrificed frame rate for better graphics. So you might be playing your game in HD, but, well, your frames are weak. PS2 had to rely on third-party services and developers for online multiplayer, while the Xbox 360S and the Xbox Series X both have paid online services where people pay a monthly fee to access online multiplayer. Now, I could go on and on about everything in the table, but here's a thought. What does all this information look like in practice? What do games that run on these consoles actually look like compared to each other? Well, now we're going to be comparing some games that are on each of these consoles to compare what they look like to each other. So let's start off with some racing games. Here's Gran Turismo 3 for the PS2, here's Midnight Club Los Angeles for the Xbox 360, and here's Forza Horizon 5 for the Xbox Series X. Come on! Come on! Comparison? What comparison? There is no comparison. One game looks like it might as well just be one of those arcade racing games that you'd find at Intensity, while the other one looks like it might as well just be real life. When it comes to graphics, it's clear that the PS2 and the Xbox Series X are complete opposites to each other, while the Xbox 360S looks like it's a nice blend between the two of them. If this doesn't summarize 20 years of the evolution of consoles and console graphics, then I don't know what will. Let's look at some other games. Here's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 for the PS2, and here's Skate 3 for the Xbox 360. Now, once again, it is pretty much a night and day difference. The textures and objects in the PS2 game look a lot more badly rendered, while the Xbox 360's graphics are more defined and more clear. And also, just look at it. It looks much better. Now let's compare some games from the same franchise. Here's Halo 3 for the Xbox 360, and here's Halo Infinite for the Xbox Series X. Now, apart from the obvious graphical differences, the first thing that I noticed with these clips was the difference in frame rate. Halo 3 runs at 30 FPS on the Xbox 360, while for me, on the Xbox Series X, it ran at 120 frames per second, which is triple the frame rate of Halo 3 and the Xbox 360.